It has been such a busy 48 hours across the U.S. just in terms of the weather. We have a deep trough across the western U.S. that has been feeding these low pressure systems right through the west coast, up and over the Sierra Nevadas. You're seeing the winter storm that impacted the state of California earlier this week. That made its way into the Intermountain West, where it kicked off these cyclones in the plains. These are kind of a hallmark of spring in the continental U.S., and they brought dust storms, fires, wildfire threat to portions of the high plains, the western plains. You can see that fire burning there. That was one we were watching. And the Panhandle, further to the southeast, Woodward, Oklahoma, some of the communities there are unfortunately affected by these wildfires. With the dry conditions here lately and late winter, the high winds, you can see the dust blowing from eastern Colorado, those wildfires kicking up in western Oklahoma. And this has been a significant storm system, and we almost had like multiple lows come through with the same broader long wave trough. And we're seeing that same trough shoot off another low here this morning that we have to talk about. I'm just reviewing some of the satellite imagery from the past 48 hours. You can see those fires burning there in Oklahoma. We just saw this one on the visible satellite. That's that one kind of right here in the Panhandle. You'll see it kick off here in a second. There are ones further to the southeast underneath some of that high cloud cover. But watching these burn was just the videos. You saw some fire whirls and some of the videos closer to these fires. There were some further to the north as well. And then yesterday, reports of potentially fires in like eastern Iowa, as far east as getting close to the central Corn Belt, like in northwest Illinois. We just look at the all hazards map as of this morning from NOAA. The inclement weather continues, to say the least. Red flag warnings, i.e. fire danger, this wildfire threat, stretching all the way from Missouri almost to the Mississippi River, all the way back south to the Continental Divide in New Mexico, portions of southern Colorado. That mustard color, that's a familiar sight. That is those high wind warnings now further to the west, but still brisk winds over the southern portions of the Central Plains today. And again, we've been dry. We have that dust flying. I've sent pictures from a colleague of mine from the dust that got blown further north into some of the rain and caused the cars to have dust on it, from states away. And then over in the west, we have another system impacting Central California here this morning. I'll show you that on the radar in a second. So we have additional winter storm warnings all the way from the transverse ranges, kind of bracketing Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley down here in Southern California. High wind warnings for portions of the coast, extreme cold warnings, again, for some of those coastal valleys, and then over near the San Joaquin Valley. I'm going to show you where I'm pointing at right in here. A freeze watch for the next 48 hours, and winter storm warnings in portions of Nebraska. Western Iowa, near Omaha, with snow falling here this morning in western portions of that state. That's expected to push east. That low pressure system I'll show you in a minute, kind of spinning up right here on the backside of that. Strong winds. Gusty winds moving from west to east across the central part of the country. And then you still have that kind of dichotomy that earlier this winter we had those dense fog advisories underneath that ridge over the western U.S. Here this morning they're over Pennsylvania, Ohio, eastern Michigan. Kind of shows you where the kind of calmer, quieter weather is in this pattern right now. Jump over and just show you more satellite imagery. This dust storm front forming in western Kansas. You can see that right along the line there, making one of those dust storms that we so often see this time of year, especially when we're dry like this. And we have that added drought pressure. Again, just so much satellite imagery from the storm. There's that deep trough coming into the western U.S. You can kind of see those bubbly clouds in the middle of it, kicking off the lows, the precipitation, the cloud shield out ahead of it. This was earlier this week. Again, powerful weather systems impacting the U.S. early this week with a number of forms of weather impacts. The burn scar, we posted this yesterday, up through, again, the Panhandle, Oklahoma, stretching all the way into southwest Kansas. You can see how wide that burn scar is. You're talking like getting to like a county level of acreage there, at least like a small county, east of Liberal, Kansas. And this is, when we talk about long-range forecasting, I don't mean long-range like 10 days. When we talk about like sub-seasonal, seasonal forecasting out a month plus. I mentioned this on Tuesday. I'm going to harp on it again. So often we're trying to connect what's happening now to where we think that narrative's going in the future. If those two things don't make sense, if they don't line up, our confidence decreases on the long-range forecast because you always have to, it's a bird in hand. That same rule applies to weather forecasting. And in a lot of these analogs, these are years that are going to look familiar to you. If you've watched these videos, 2018, 2023, Eric talked about it this week, 2014, 2009, we saw, time and time again in a lot of these analog years, that plains drought pressure. And so when I look at the all hazards map this morning, when I look and see these dust storm photos, these wildfire threats in the same sort of acreage counties here, we saw those red flag warnings stretching across Kansas into portions of Missouri. We know we're lacking snowpack, at least in portions of the northern and the western plains, even portions of the upper Midwest like Wisconsin and Minnesota. They did get some here recently, but it just adds that kind of extra concern there, or at least it adds the confidence that, that drier forecast might play out, given it's already sort of materializing. Now, if you look at the 6-week change map in the USDA Drought Monitor, this will be updated. Typically when I press record on this video and publish it, they update the USDA Drought Monitor map, but at least as of last week, looking at the 6 weeks change, you can see the South Central Plains trending drier over the last month and a half. The Western High Plains trending drier, even portions of the Carolinas and Florida. Now, the Southeast is getting rain here this week. We'll see that as the system tracks to the east. There's been portions in here in the Midwest that have gotten rainfall. Obviously, we had the ice storm, portions in the Mid-South that helped to improve some of the precipitation, just ancillary. But by and large, the trend through this corridor has been on the drier side, and it's something we have to watch. We got up the precipitation just from yesterday, the last 24 hours, California, additional rainfall there, even some down into Southern California, that was more appreciable. Northern Plains, Upper Midwest, getting some snowfall out of this, even had blizzard-like conditions at times. North Dakota, portions of northeast South Dakota, I should say, Minnesota, Upper Midwest, getting a shot of snowfall here. Again, some of this area still could use this snowpack going into spring. So kind of rooting for some of this, not if you want to shovel, but at least getting it into the soil moisture I think would be productive. But again, would like to see it fill in further to the south and further to the west. Now, the good news is where that low is positioned today, kind of over Kansas. Zoom in here, get a better look at those surface winds as of this morning. And I identified 2 pretty quick lows on this map. One here just off the coast of San Francisco. That's bringing some heavy rain here to central California. We have another lee cyclone here forming over Kansas, very traditionally. Those strong westerly winds prompting those red flag warnings again, but we have backside snow on this. In western Nebraska, we'll take that snowfall in an area that has been so often clear. We've been able to see from the satellite imagery all the way down to the ground in western Nebraska, western North Dakota, western South Dakota. So rooting for snow in that corridor here, which we're getting some with that winter storm warning I showed you earlier. And then that old low up here near Lake Superior that brought that snow yesterday into areas like Eau Claire over toward Minneapolis. Look at the radar here this morning. There's that weak low still spinning up here over the upper Midwest. Just some light showers still rotating around that. The Red River of the North. There in Nebraska, that heavier snowfall coming down in northeast Colorado near Ray. Further west on the Platte, some showers here percolating into like the Mid-Atlantic, eastern Ohio and Tennessee River valleys. And there's that stronger storm coming to California. Get, again, additional winter storm warnings for portions of California. Unfortunately, the tragedy which occurred this week with the skiers and the avalanche there near Lake Tahoe. Unfortunately, it looks like what they announced yesterday, one of the more deadly avalanches in California state history. And unfortunately, it just shows you how strong and impactful this weather trend has been over the last 48 hours across the continental U.S. And we still have more to go. It's lightening up, I think, into the future. We still have impacts, I think, here through this weekend that are worth discussing. First one up, I'm looking at the 3-kilometer NAM here forecast. I'm going to play this forward. We're going to see this low spin up here in Kansas near Missouri. That snow spreading west to east across the river in the state of Nebraska. Narrow corridor in through Omaha here into western Iowa. Rainfall out ahead of it, snow on the backside. Can see some of that rain getting over into the DC, DMV area in the Mid-Atlantic here this afternoon. Watching for potential severe storms across central Illinois into central Indiana down toward the Ohio River Valley, kind of that corridor here this evening for potential severe weather development. This is a decent low. It's got enough moisture pulled up north into it, kind of near I-70, I-74 and south, that we could see some supercells, potentially a tornado threat, and maybe an overnight wind threat as well through that corridor there. Now, again, on the backside of the system, Des Moines, northeast Iowa, up into western Wisconsin, kind of the Leslie area over toward Madison, potentially central Wisconsin overnight, looking at a decent but narrow snowstorm. And I would expect those winter storm warnings to be issued all the way up that corridor as we go through tonight, maybe even a winter storm warning or two getting in here with some of that heavier snowfall. That low wraps up an additional shot of rain for the Mid-Atlantic, maybe a brief but heavy shot of snow for portions of the New England states there, and that one kicks out of here. Now, at this point, seeing some additional rain here as I take this all the way out through the southeast into Saturday, some additional rain for the Pacific Northwest. But I mentioned this a second ago, the trend is generally calmer through the next 7 days after we get through this last low pressure system here. Given that recent trend, the Storm Prediction Center is sticking with that SPC slight risk from like I-55 east all the way over toward like Dayton, south along the Ohio River Valley. But I really think kind of the state line of Illinois and Indiana, maybe kind of south central Illinois into southwest Indiana toward like Bloomington, highest threat potentially to see a tornado today, maybe some wind with that as well. Not as concerned about hail, but can't rule it out. Again, 5% for tornado. We'll see what they do with their morning update here, but a decent severe setup, certainly given that we're still in February at this point. Why don't I just jump over? This is the HRRR forecast. Anytime we have this more, see if I can update this. I don't think we have the latest run-in based on when I'm recording this video. Let that load a second here. Looking at the higher resolution HRRR model here, trying to get some timing down for some of these superstorms as they develop. The HRRR did a good job with that little blob here over near like I-80. If you remember, we were looking at the radar this morning, and you see that little convective blob, maybe some thunder being recorded here in northern Indiana, and the HRRR caught that pretty early in the forecast. So whenever the HRRR, again, this goes back to what I just said, the bird in hand. If these high-resolution models are accurately showing, early on in the forecast period, in the first few hours, what's happening right now, I have more confidence in them that they're going to figure out what's going to happen later in the day. So if the HRRR model, which purports to tell me that, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen at 4 p.m. this afternoon on Thursday, can't pick up this convective blob here that I know is occurring at 6 a.m. Central Time, why should I believe anything it says further out, in the model run? So the fact that it picked that up decently gives me some more confidence in it. But you can see even by like noon, 12 p.m. Central Time, trying to form a supercell here along I-70, maybe even south of I-70, like Marion, Illinois, pushing that east towards southwest Indiana. Maybe some other stronger storms kind of in here, 1 or 2 at least, through the Ohio River Valley. That one looks pretty healthy, at least from this HRRR run. This is 3 p.m., 4 p.m. through Bloomington, southwest of Indianapolis. It's kind of that corridor I mentioned earlier. It's maybe a higher threat. But again, through that area of the slight risk, keep an eye out today for an early season severe threat. Now to the north, I-80, Chicago, this is going to be I think just cold rain, but you can start to see that snow getting into Des Moines tonight. This is 9, 11, 10 p.m. 9, 10, 11, there you go. I can count at 6 a.m. Up toward midnight, heavier snow falling for western and central Wisconsin. This has been trending toward the southeast. The National Weather Service is kind of mentioning that in their latest updates, that some of the earlier forecasts had this impacting, all the way up here toward like Eau Claire, maybe toward like Wausau, but been trending a little bit toward the southeast with the heavier precipitation here before that exits off to the east, as we mentioned earlier. All right, that's going to get us up to the ECMWF forecast. I'm going to play that through this evening. You can see that snowfall I was just talking about. We now have snowfall over the Four Corners tonight. An additional low kind of tried to form, but there was just too much backside high pressure on this most immediate low pressure system that we're really just seeing kind of a rainfall event on Saturday morning for the southeast. Not too significant of severe weather or snow on the backside of this. Just rainfall event for the southeast. They'll take it, given some of those areas have trended over drier. Light snow in the upper Midwest, but even by Saturday through Sunday, trending on the calmer side. Some light snow showers potentially by the end of the weekend for the Mid-Atlantic, Eastern Corn Belt, Pacific Northwest, as I mentioned, going back over wetter early next week. That continues to be the case. Some of this getting back into central and northern California in the form of rain, maybe some Sierra snowfall. We'll take the Idaho, western Montana, Yellowstone snow. We still need improved snowpack across the west. We have more northwest flow getting out into next week. So we see some of these almost clipper-like systems moving northwest to southeast across the upper Midwest. Some rainfall, snowfall associated with that. I'm all the way a week out now in the forecast. Additional precipitation likely in the eastern half of the U.S. as that northwest flow kicks off some of these weaker systems, but not nearly as active of a pattern without that deep troughing either over the west or the central U.S. In fact, we're starting to build a ridging, at least weak ridging, back into the western U.S. in this kind of 6 to 10 day part of the forecast. That's changing that forecast scenario around a little bit. I do want to show the near-term snow forecast from the 3-kilometer NAM. Heavy snow coming back to the California mountain ranges there, even the Intermountain West. Again, the Colorado River needs this, even into like the Wasatch Range, some of these mountain ranges here in western Colorado. You can see that narrow but heavy band of snow, anywhere from like 4 to 8 inches lining up through Omaha, parts of Des Moines, maybe more so Ames, up into west central Wisconsin here. That's going to be narrow, so folks to the southeast and the northwest going to miss out, but some folks in here could hit some higher amounts if they stay in that snowfall for quite a few hours here. Other than that, though, we get into this kind of northwest flow pattern after this week, and you can kind of see that ridge. It's much weaker than it was earlier in winter. It's stronger ridge producing those record high winter temperatures in this corridor here. This one a little bit weaker, a little bit flatter, but it is enough to keep this area underneath the ridge dry. We have those systems that just bring some rainfall toward the eastern U.S. I mentioned the southeast, multiple chances there. by and large, underneath that ridge, all the way over here, adding in that additional drought pressure, right? We talked about that 6-week change map over that same kind of corridor there. Again, anytime the long-range forecast lines up like that with where we're thinking about more seasonally, our confidence improves a bit in that regard. Now, looking out at that ridge from the ECMWF ensemble forecast, I'm going to bring this back. I had it too far out as I was preparing the tabs here this morning. I'm going to take this out to like Wednesday of next week. That's when you can see that. By and large, the dominant flow pattern here is out of the northwest, enough to kick off some systems here through the mid-Atlantic and the southeast late next week. But again, that weak ridge over the southwest near the Four Corners region, just kind of keeping the moisture at bay into the central part of the country. And if I play this forecast forward, 10 days out now, 11 days out, just kind of general weak ridging here. You start to see maybe a ridge here well off the coast that might allow some troughing to develop here off the western U.S. Could kick off some system here through the central U.S., but it would likely be on the weaker side, I would think, in early March. Playing this forecast, I don't see, a wildly active pattern here, save for some systems kind of sneaking through on that northwest flow. Those aren't ever quite as impactful, obviously, as what we're seeing this week. So late February, early March may be going a little less active. What we didn't see materialize is that big cold shot that, frankly, we advertised as a possibility at the end of February and early March, that big cold air outbreak. We're just not seeing it yet. Now, this is a 10 to 14-day forecast. It could be hiding in here, not showing itself until a little bit earlier. That's still worth mentioning. At least right now, not looking as high of a chance maybe as we thought earlier in mid-February. I do want to talk about temperatures before I go too much further. We've been enjoying this warm up here in the central and eastern part of the continental U.S. here. As that trough has been positioned across the west, it's brought that southerly flow up. That makes sense. We have a slight risk all the way up toward I-74 here in the Midwest. You're going to need some warmth to have a severe setup that far north in February. Cold temperatures have been locked in over like Calgary, the Canadian Prairie. You can see that in the Golden Triangle here of western Montana. Overnight temperatures this morning down to like negative 14 Fahrenheit. Great Falls, very cold there. That's where the cold air has been living. We thought it would maybe build up here in mid to late February and then had the potential to spill out. It just never spilled out into the central part of the country, at least not yet. But the western U.S. is going over colder. That freeze watch is out for the San Joaquin Valley, that extreme cold warning for portions of central California. Overnight temperatures tonight into tomorrow morning, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's enough to get down into frost territory. You can see up near Redding, 27 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature is at 34 for the overnight forecast from the National Weather Service, it can always dive down, a few degrees below that on an off chance. It wouldn't shock me. We wake up tomorrow to some freezing temperatures, maybe near Delano, maybe, areas west of Fresno, even a little bit lower in the valley. So, again, those fans will probably be running tonight, would be my guess. The bloom is going on right now, the almond bloom in the Central Valley. It's been kind of a rough February with the rainfall that's coming down right now. They rely on bees, actually. It's one of the most bee-dependent areas of agriculture in the world. And the bees they don't like this cold weather. They don't like rain. They don't like clouds. They like nice kind of warm summer or spring days. And they're needed to pollinate a lot of the fruit that we depend on coming out of California. So it hasn't been an ideal spring so far, at least February, for some of those bloom areas. But I am looking at Friday, this cold front moving through the Central Plains that pushes into the Midwest on Saturday and Sunday. Temperatures coming down this weekend from many of the areas that have been enjoying the warmth since that last cold air outbreak earlier this month, all the way through Florida. Again, I don't think we're going to see the crazy low temperatures and falling, raining iguanas or whatever, but it is going to be colder certainly for the latter part of the month. And we warm up quickly behind that late next week as that ridge starts to materialize. We mentioned that earlier. In the long range, with that kind of northwest flow, the long range forecast, the ensembles have been growing over, again, drier in the middle part of the country. You can see that Texas, the Central Plains, ECMWF, AIFS kind of on an island right now. That's not uncommon being an operational model. California going back drier and all three as well. You can see the CPC highlighting that area. But with enough kind of deviations in that northwest flow, we're still expecting these clipper systems to move through the upper Midwest, into the eastern Corn Belt, into the mid-Atlantic. You can see that on some of these forecasts here. The ECMWF ensemble may be a little bit drier for the upper Midwest, but still that possibility that there's those clipper systems kicking out just enough precipitation here through the upper Midwest, maybe even the far northern plains, to keep some precipitation going through the end of the month. I think that we kind of want it more back toward the west, but that's where these forecasts stands right now. Areas that are higher confidence to miss out, again, central and southern plains, areas that we started the video with. I've been talking about the west a lot this winter due to their lack of snowfall. This map is updated believe as of yesterday, February 18th. So I will say, let me flip that back off really quick. The map was redder a week and a half ago, and the deficits were worse. We've started to fill in some of these. Certainly the Sierra Nevada is going back closer to average. In fact, some of the basins here, like near Lake Tahoe, are back to average, if not above it. You see portions of like Idaho, western Montana, getting near Yellowstone are almost back to average. Fortunately, the southern Cascades, portions of the inner Colorado kind of basin and plateau here, still running below average, but at least they're getting into like the orange. I'm splitting hairs here at this point, but we'll take all we can get at the end of the season here, especially because some of the long-range forecasts go back over drier for like Colorado, California, and south. Want to look at that long-range forecast now, looking at the ECMWF AFS. This is those Haber-Muller diagrams, so really what I'm looking at here, I know this is going to be small, can't make it much bigger. Looking at North America here on the forecast for these troughs and ridges is what I'm showing here from that ECMWF AI model. We're looking below that line out into the forecast, and I'm looking for like any big active pattern change. The one that we just went through was this big deep trough here. You can see almost like getting on the lower end of the color bar for those heights, and that's what's produced all the inclement weather here this week. That trough is retrograding out into the Pacific. That's not an uncommon evolution for those, and we're getting ridging, developing back over the central part of the country. We have some brief troughs moving through that, and that northwest flow, that's like February 24th and beyond. We just talked through the implications of that. But when I look beyond that, out into early March, just kind of see this weak ridging signal. I don't see like a huge west coast trough like we're seeing this week. And until that changes, I'm not going to forecast any sort of crazy weather trend in advance of that. You might think, okay, well, is this deep troughing here over the Atlantic and retrograde all the way back over North America? You just didn't quite see that materialize. You saw this ridge retrograde into the Pacific, but not that troughing here that was over the Atlantic. So again, the atmosphere has tendencies, but it doesn't always play along. It's kind of up to us to kind of track and trend when they are. Speaking of one of those trends, if we look out into the long range through March, the extended forecast here, still on the wetter side for the Corn Belt, upper Midwest, portions of the Mid-South and East. There's some acreage in here that I know is looking for some moisture here, so I don't think this would necessarily be a bad thing to get soil moistures replenished before the plant season begins. But again, areas to be concerned about here, the far southeast, getting into like the citrus, some of the cotton acres here that have been trending over drier over the last 6 weeks. And then obviously the southern central plains, trending drier in these long-range extended forecasts, and California. I mentioned kind of California, Nevada, Arizona, portions of the Colorado Plateau. Unfortunately, don't see a huge wet signal here. Now, again, these long-range forecasts aren't perfect. We just talked about how the long-range forecast for late February, early March didn't really come to fruition, but this is just the latest forecast that we do have for the month of March. I think part of what we're seeing here, the MJO activity over the beginning of the next month, we're seeing this transition kind of either into null space or phases 5, 6, and 7, and really to kind of push a big trough back into the western U.S. We want to see that transition that we saw occur in mid-February, which was 8, 1, 2, and then 3, which has occurred here recently, kind of what we call those more cold, at times we can call these the more cold, at least in the winter phases, versus the warmer ones here, and just kind of quieter weather as we transition back toward like the 7, 8, 1, 2 area, potentially at the end of March. That's too far out to put any specifics here. I think just generally, that's the trend we're seeing in early March. And I want to show this. This is the latest seasonal forecast from the IRI model at Columbia Institute. Their forecast for spring has some of that, at least the western high plains drought pressure there, just slightly. They do have some of that wetness further toward the east, like the Ohio River Valley over toward the mid-Atlantic, have some far upper Midwest, like Ontario, maybe slight dryness there. Curiously going over wetter for portions of the kind of Canadian border there near Montana. But keep an eye on that drought area there, obviously, as it gets closer to the southern plains. Unfortunately, this isn't the friendliest forecast for like that miracle March scenario, at least for like the southern Sierras or getting over in toward Colorado right now. Their long-range forecast, again, same one, March, April, May, kind of for the corn crop in South America. Surprisingly dry, all the way from like Mato Grosso do Sul, at least portions of that, and then down through southern Brazil, even into parts of Uruguay, Paraguay here. Curiously, Argentina staying over, at least on the wetter side of this forecast. As much as I've seen this here, these forecasts struggle in more of these tropical regions. So there has been some of these long-range forecasts that have been drier, at least in this corridor here through southern Brazil, portions of northern Argentina. It's worth keeping an eye on. But as much as I mentioned that, we got to keep an eye on where we're at right now, right? When we see these long-range forecasts, can we connect them to things we're seeing right now? And at least over the 7 or 10-day forecast for the continent, for countries like Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, even portions of Argentina. largely on the wetter side, save for some dry areas in here in northern Argentina. So next 10 days staying on the wetter side in this quarter here as they switch over to the safrinha crop. Our eastern Brazil, very wet, and just don't see that strong drought signal yet, that maybe that some of these seasonal models have started to pick up on a little bit in spring for that quarter here. If we do quickly transition into El Nino, that dryness tends to pop up, so it's still worth mentioning. I mentioned El Nino. Curiously, they put these forecast grids over land, and some of those grids and pixels ended up over the Galapagos. Look at how wet those are. In fact, the wettest value on here, in terms of percentages, is in that area here, and that is kind of a hallmark of these early developing El Niños. So, I keep showing these South America forecasts. My brain wants to run up here and look what's going on in the Eastern Pacific, right? Because that's going to tell us maybe where we're headed further in the Pacific in 2026. So I'm going to continue doing that over the next few weeks. Hope you join us as we figure that out. And Eric will talk with you all tomorrow on Friday.